Okay, welcome to the stream. The second part of the nervous system. Right. So today, what we are going to do. So previously, what we learned in the previous class. In the previous class, we learned about the idea of CNS and PNS. Right. Now, under CNS, we saw what we have two things. We have brain and we have spinal cord. Right. Now, this big thing in our head is known as the brain, and the small rope-like structure that goes down within our spine is known as the spinal cord. Now, today what we are going to do, we are going to talk about the CNS and the associated PNS. That means today our class is focused on brain. We will learn about brain as a CNS, what are the parts of the brain, and then what we will be doing, we will be discussing about the PNS, the peripheral nervous system associated with the brain. So PNS associated with the brain. So that's our today's goal, right? So now in the previous class, what we learned about the nervous system. We learned about neurons. Now there are few things are left to talk about neurons. We will be covering up that while we will be doing our last part of this class, that is the third part of nervous system, that will be dealing with the spinal cord and the associated PNS. All right. So today we will be today's class is a very brief class full of brain. So let's get going. Okay. So basically what happens, so let's start with that. So we will be looking into the brain. So let's take a close-up of this brain. So if we take a close-up of this brain, we just get to see, okay, once, very sorry. Yeah. So if we take the close-up of the brain, we get to see this kind of a structure. So what is that? This is what a brain looks like. This is what a brain looks like if you take out the brain from the human body. This is a very original kind of a diagram that you can see over here, or an illustration, right? Now this part of the brain, the convoluted part over here, what are the things that we see? The swollen parts over here that you can see over here, the swollen parts are known as sulci. In singular, these are known as I'm very sorry. I'm losing a track of what I'm saying. Okay. So over here, the swollen parts are known as gyri, or in singular, it is gyrus. And the deep grooves between the swollen parts are known as your sulci or sulcus. Right. So the brain, the outside appearance of the brain is a convoluted appearance. It looks like a tube is put in a very convoluted manner, and it has few sulci and it has few gyri. Right. That is the external feature of the brain that you have to describe the brain. It is a structure full of gyri and sulci. Right. So basically, if we take a cut section of the brain from this plane, so what we would have found? We would have found the brain looks like this. Now this elevated parts are your gyrus, and the depressed parts in between two elevated parts are, known as sulcus. Okay, gyrus and sulcus. All right. Basically, that is the idea of sulci and gyri. Now what happens? Now this entire structure of the brain, this part is known as the cerebrum. Whatever you can see now over here from outside, whatever we can see of the brain, let's see whatever we can make out of the brain. So this entire structure from here to the entire this thing, this is known as cerebrum, right? And over here, this small part over here, this is known as cerebellum. Okay, that is known as a cerebellum. And this hanging stem like part that you can see over here, this hanging stem like part is known as the brain stem. Okay, so basically whatever we can see from outside, we can see we have a cerebrum, we have a cerebellum, and we have a brain stem. All right, all right. Okay, so basically these are the basic parts of the brain, right? These are the basic parts of the brain that we were talking about. Now we will go a step further and we will focus more into the structure of the brain, right? We will focus more on the structure of the brain. Now why this so colorful linings are made and colorful regions are made, we will come to that later on. We will try to see why these colorful markings are made. We will see that, but for now we will move on to a greater detail of the brain. So for now, try to assimilate this much of the structure, right? So over here, how much we learned? We learned about the sulci and the gyri, then we learned about the cerebrum, then we learned about the cerebellum, and we learned about the brainstem. So the cerebrum, cerebellum, and the brainstem are the main parts of the brain that you can see with your naked eye in a brain. Now, if you have to see the more in-depth structures of the brain, you have to cut the brain into half and you have to look into the brain. So basically, we have not covered much. So a brief revision before we move on. What we have? So basically, we have the brain. So basically, what's our target for today? So we are going to talk about, in today's class, we are going to talk about the brain as a CNS and all the PNS associated with the brain. That means all the nerves associated with the brain. And in the next class, we will be doing the spinal cord and the PNS associated with the spinal cord. So that will be the last class. And in the previous class, we did neurons. We talked about neurons, and a few things are left to talk about neurons that we will be covering up with the spinal cord, because there are certain things in the spinal cord like reflex action and stuff, in which you will have to use those properties of the neuron as a application. So over there we will be finishing off those stuff, right? So today our class is a class full of brains. We will be talking about brains exclusively. So let's move on. So basically we were talking about the brain. So if we take a brain and look it from outside, we have two parts. The brain looks like a series of convoluted tubes. The swollen parts of the tubes are known as gyrus, or in plural it is known as gyri, and the sulci in between, that is the creases in between, are known as your sulcus or sulci. Alright, so basically if you look into a brain, if you cut the brain into half and you look into the brain, you will see that the brain looks like this kind of an arrangement. Alright, now in this kind of an arrangement, what you can make out, you should clearly understand that these swollen parts are your gyri and this depressed parts are known as your sulci or sulcus. Okay, so now what else we can have? We have basically we have another part of the brain that we were talking about. So this is the brain. If this is the brain, there are three main structures that are visible. That is, the first part is the cerebrum. This whole entire part is the cerebrum. This part, this entire part. Then over here there's a small cerebrum type part just below the cerebrum, that is known as cerebellum, and in front of cerebellum we have a stem of a plant like structure that is known as a brain stem. Now these are the things, these are the gross appearance of the, this is the gross appearance of the brain that you can make out with your naked eye. But after that, if you have to go into the in-depth structures of the brain, you have to cut the brain into half and you have to look into it. So you have to cut the brain into a LS, a sagittal section. Sagittal section of the brain. So how does it look? So the sagittal section looks like this. So it's very simple. What you do, you take a head of a person. Suppose this is the head of a person. So suppose the brain will be somewhere over here. You cut it open like this and you see the head from a sideway view. Okay, and over here you get to see your brain. Alright, so this is the view that I am talking about. This is the sagittal section of the brain. Okay, now over here in the brain we have few things that we have to learn. So now I was talking about the cerebellum. Now there are very important things are going to come in. So you have to deal with that. So now compare this diagram with this diagram. Now the previous diagram with this diagram. Now what we have? We have, if I try to highlight this part of the brain, this part of the brain, can you name this part of the brain as we discussed just now? This part of the brain, can you tell me the name of this part of the brain? I think the highlighter, you are able to see the highlighter. This part of the brain, this part. This part of the brain. What is the name of this part of the brain? This part is known as cerebellum. Cerebrum, not cerebellum. This is the cerebrum. Alright, isn't it? Now, another thing that you can identify, the thing that you can identify is this part. What you can identify? Again, you can identify this part of the brain. What is this part of the brain called? What is this part of the brain called? Just try to relate with the left hand side diagram. I think this part is known as the cerebellum, right? Very good. This is known as the cerebellum. This part. Now, then if this is the cerebellum, what is this part? What is this part? What is the name of this part? This green part over here? No, it's not medulla oblongata that you are trying to say. It's not medulla oblongata. We will come to that in details. Basically, this structure as a whole is known as brain stem. Okay. Now the artist of me will come out and I will try to show you a simplified diagram of the brain stem. Basically, what happens? Now let the artist within me come out, and don't laugh at my diagrams. Don't laugh, please. What happens? Suppose this is the structure. Now let me show you the idea of the brain stem. Brain stem basically looks like this kind of a structure. Okay. Brainstem is this kind of a structure, right? Can you make out it's a 3D structure? Can you understand this is a 3D structure over here? Can you understand it's a 3D structure? I have tried to show the anterior wall. This is the front and this part is the side. Though it doesn't look like a box, I've tried to make it look like a box so that you can understand it clearly. Right, now over here, this is an entire brainstem. Now this entire brainstem has few parts, like this part of the brainstem, this part is known as a midbrain. Okay, this part is known as a midbrain. Now, just below the midbrain, can you see a swelling in front? Towards the front side, can you see a swelling in towards the front side? There's a swelling in the front side. This part, can you see this part? This part is known as the pons. Okay, and below that, just below that, can you see this another swelling? Can you see another swelling? This part is known as medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata, right? I'm just writing medulla, it's actually medulla oblongata. Okay. Understand? Can you understand this part? Are we clear till this? Are we clear till this? Okay. What continues down below the medulla oblongata? The part that continues down below the medulla oblongata, this part which I am not highlighting, this is the spinal cord. So spinal cord takes origin from the medulla oblongata, and the junction of spinal cord and medulla oblongata is the part where the spinal cord leaves the skull. So this line that I have drawn, this is basically the skull foramen that I am trying to draw, a thick black band like structure. The part above it lies within the skull, and the part below it comes out of the skull into the vertebral column, right? So basically that is the idea of the brain stem. So that was the thing that we were supposed to talk about, brain stem. Now in the original piece, if we try to identify the parts, let's try to identify them, okay, one by one. Now if you see this part, okay, so just let me use the color that I've used in the original diagram, right? This part, as you can see, this part is the midbrain. Can you identify this part? Then below the midbrain, what we have? Below the midbrain we have the part known as this part is the medulla, not medulla, it's a pons, right? And below pons, what we have? Below pons till this part, what we have? This part is your medulla. So can you identify these structures in the brainstem now? Have you got some clarity? And below that continues the spinal cord. Okay, are we clear till this? Are we clear till this? Okay, all right. Now, so should I erase up all this stuff? Now, why it is known as medulla oblongata? So let's ponder on the name. So first of all, cortex and medulla I have told you. Cortex and medulla. Now in this brain, basically which part is the cortex? Now if you see the brain stem, basically if I try to draw, basically this is a kind of a structure which is the brain stem, around which we have the cerebrum and the cerebellum wrapped, right? This kind of a structure it is, isn't it? Isn't it? This kind of a structure it is. So now we have learned in biology that whatever structure is outside, that structure is known as cortex. So this part is known as cortex. This part is also known as cerebral cortex, and this part is also known as cerebellar cortex, right? And within cortex, towards the inner side, we have something known as the medulla. Always we have learned about the cortex and medulla idea. So now the brainstem as a whole is the medulla. Now the part of the medulla which is very straight, see, this part of the medulla is very straight. See, the pons is a bit, I mean, it has a tummy in front, like regular Bengali people, it has a tummy in front. Now the brainstem has some elevated structure at the back, right? But the third part of the medulla or the brainstem is very straight, like a pillar. That's why it is known as the oblong medulla. Oblong, which means straight, medulla, and from that comes the name medulla oblongata. Oblongata. Okay, I hope this is clear. So now we are clear with the brainstem part of it, right? Are we clear till this? Are we clear? All right. Now what happens? Now what we have? Now let's move on to the idea of, now brainstem is clear. Now what is cerebral cortex or cerebrum, what is cerebellar cortex or cerebellum, we all know. Now what happens just above the midbrain? Now you can identify that this part is our midbrain, right? This part is our midbrain. Now just above midbrain, like a pot, sits a structure known as thalamus. Thalamus. Okay, so thalamus has a role in controlling our body motions and movements. So now where the thalamus will be over here? Over here, the thalamus will be at this place. Just if you try to focus more closely, over here, the thalamus will be somewhere over here, the thalamus. This region will be the region of thalamus. Okay, this region will be the region of thalamus, and below it what will be there? Below it in the front we have something known as the hypothalamus. In front of it, somewhere over here, this kind of a structure is present, which is known as hypothalamus. That is just present below thalamus. It is present below thalamus, so it's hypothalamus. So over here in the diagram where the hypothalamus will be, let's see. So over here, this region is known as the hypothalamus. From in front of the hypothalamus, what we have a structure known as the pituitary. Over here we have a structure known as pituitary. Can you see the diagram that I am drawing with my hand? Try to identify the diagram over here. Try to identify it over here. This part is the pituitary. All right. So now if we try to make out where is the pituitary over here, as you can see, this part is the pituitary. Like over here, it is the pituitary. This part is the pituitary. Can you identify which part is the pituitary? Just below hypothalamus. So now more three terms, we got to know more three terms. One is thalamus, then we have hypothalamus, then we have pituitary. Okay. All right, can you understand? Above thalamus, we're coming to that. What's above thalamus? We're coming. Just right now, tell me, are you clear with the idea of thalamus, hypothalamus, and pituitary? What's above thalamus? We will come to that. So we are moving a multiple of 3s till now, and we are trying to build our own brain with it. Okay, so now let's see what's above the hypothalamus, right? So over here, just above the hypothalamus, see, try to understand one thing very clearly. Suppose now the brain, if you see from the front, what you will get to see the brain. So one part of the brain looks like this and the other part looks like this, right? So basically brain has a clear distinction between the two parts. So it is made up of two hemispheres. It's a spherical structure. So this part is known as one hemisphere, that is, there's a left hemisphere and there's a right hemisphere, right? Left hemisphere and right hemisphere. Now you need something to join the hemispheres. Over here, what we have over here, to join the hemispheres, we have some nerve fibers. Nerve fibers basically means axons of certain nerves which pass over here, and those nerve fibers or axons act as a bridge between the two hemispheres and held the two hemispheres together. Now that bridge is this part. Can you understand what is that bridge? Can you understand the idea of the bridge? Here you go. Here you have your bridge. This entire region that you have is the bridge part. This part is the bridge that I was talking about. Okay, and this bridge is also present. This bridge is known as corpus callosum. Corpus callosum. This is known as corpus callosum. Okay, so corpus callosum is a connecting structure which joins the two parts of the brain. Now what happens? Now similar kind of a structure is present for the cerebellar hemispheres. Like if cerebrum is made up of two hemispheres, then cerebellum is supposed to be made up of two hemispheres as well, right? Like over here, if I draw, if this is the cerebellum, then, and in the middle we will have, can you see the upper left corner diagram that I am building up, and this will be our brain stem over here then. So this is what the brain looks like. Now, so what is the structure that is joining the two cerebellum? So over here also you have another structure to join the two cerebellum. There's a structure over here. As you can see, there's a whitish material over here. That was, I don't know whether you are able to see it or not. See over here, there's a whitish material. Okay, let me take a highlighter, and this whitish material that is coming in, that is the part which joins the two cerebellar hemisphere, and that is known as the vermis. Vermis connects the two hemispheres of cerebellum. Are you noting these things down, or are you taking screenshots? These are important. Like you have to know the functions of different parts, because people will ask you the names of the different parts and the functions of different parts. Like you have to remember that corpus callosum joins the two hemispheres of cerebrum. Vermis joins the two hemispheres of the cerebellum. Now brainstem has three parts, that is midbrain, pons and medulla oblongata, right? Now just above midbrain sits the thalamus. Just in front and below the thalamus there is hypothalamus. Connecting to the hypothalamus we have something known as the pituitary, right? So these are the things that you are supposed to remember. All right, now what happens? Now we have built our brain till this. Now our small brain over here, let's build it up a bit more. So now we understand the idea of the corpus callosum. Now over here we have our corpus callosum. Now above corpus callosum, whatever we have, this whatever part is our cerebral cortex. Now above this, whatever we have, this part is our cerebral cortex, right? So should we focus on the cerebral cortex now? Another thing that I have not covered yet, I will be covering the ventricular system. Just remember, I will be telling you a few things that you are supposed to remember. I will do the ventricular system after that. There's something known as the ventricular system. Till now, are we clear? Are we clear till this? Just note these things down. You don't need to draw a diagram of a brain. You need not at all. You need not at all draw a diagram of a brain. These are just for your clear understanding. And for your kind information, this brain that you can see over here on the right hand side is a photo of an original brain. It's an original brain photo. Brain looks exactly like this. Okay, so let's move on to our next discussion. So I will just try to revise up a few things. Like if this is again a brain diagram, so now you will be answering me the stuff, what is what over here. Okay, right, you took short notes. It's nice to see that you are taking short notes. Now you will be telling me what part is what. Now tell me that what is this part? What is this part? This part is supposed to be corpus callosum, right? Right. Now if I ask you what is this big part, this big boy over here, what is this big part? I told you who has a tummy. Okay, its name is pons, right? It's pons. For your understanding of its better understanding, I just flipped the structure of the brain. This brain is the flip of the previous one, right? Like we were looking into the left hemisphere previously, and now we are looking into the right hemisphere for revision purposes. Okay. Now this is your pons. Now what is the meaning of the pons? The word pons simply means it is a bridge. Pons means bridge. So it's bridge between what? It's a bridge between midbrain to medulla. So remember it like this. So it's a bridge between midbrain and medulla is your pons. Pons means bridge, right? That's why it was named pons. The names are very intuitive in brain. Okay, now should we move on? Shall we? Now if I ask you the structure What is this structure? This entire structure. This entire structure. Yes, your answer should be for this entire structure. Take your time, think and answer. Right, this part is your cerebellum, right, cerebellum. Now if this is the part, now if I ask you this part, now suppose I ask you with this part, suppose this part, if I ask you what is this part, can you tell me what is this part? What is supposed to be over here? This is going to be thalamus. Okay, so just below thalamus we have a part, this part. This part is known as, this part is known as, this part is known as hypothalamus. Hypo means below, hypothalamus, and the extension of the hypothalamus over here, this part over here, this part will be known as then the extension of the hypothalamus. The extension of the hypothalamus, what is that? Pituitary, right? Now pituitary gland is of immense importance while we will be talking about the endocrine system or the hormonal system of our body, right? Pituitary and hypothalamus are of immense importance over there. So now we are basically, this is the part, hypothalamus and pituitary, where brain, that is the nervous system is associated with the hormonal system. This is the link between nervous system and hormonal system. Very important for examination point of view. Do keep a note of it. Okay. Now, so now if we try to build our own brain from here, so if you are asked to draw a brain, you people are not generally asked to draw a brain. Now what can you do? You can simply make this kind of a structure. This is what you are going to do. Very simple, right? Then above it, what you are going to do, you are going to draw two thalamus over here. Just draw two thalamus like this, right? And do a Mercedes sign over here. And in the front of the thalamus, what you are supposed to have? You are supposed to have a hypothalamus. You will never be asked to draw a diagram of brain. That's just too complex for you guys level. this kind of a structure is present in front, right? And over here what we have the pituitary gland, right? This is the pituitary, this is the hypothalamus. Okay, and above them what we have, above them this is the structure. What is this structure that I have drawn over here? What is the structure that I have drawn over here? The roof-like structure. The roof-like structure. What will be the roof? What will be the roof? Corpus callosum. Very good. This is known as the corpus callosum, right? Now let's move on to the idea of gray matter and white matter. Now people say that Einstein had extra amount of gray matter and that's why he was a genius. Now let's delve into that fact, whether it was a truth or not. Now what is gray matter? Suppose if I draw a very easy peasy lemon squeezy neuron, which you should never draw in your exam, right? This is a very vague, very bad diagram of a neuron. Never draw this neuron for any exam in your life ever. These are just for explanatory purposes. Okay, so suppose this is one neuron that I have drawn. This is what kind of polarity? Just tell the polarity of this neuron. Just tell me the polarity of this neuron. Unipolar, bipolar, multipolar, what? Unipolar, multipolar, bipolar, or what? It's multipolar, right? Right, now this is our cyton and this rest part is our axon, right? Now in axon we have these myelin sheaths. Myelins are made up of lipid. Lipid is basically butter. Butter looks yellowish white in nature. That means the axon part of a neuron represents white matter because it looks white. Okay, because it has a myelin sheath over it. Myelin sheaths are basically lipids. Lipids are basically butters that you eat, and butters are yellowish white in color. That means the myelin sheath is also supposed to be yellowish white in color, and as the myelin sheaths are yellowish white in color, they give a yellowish white color to the axons, and as axons are yellowish white in color, they look white. And the axons are basically, myelinated axons are white matter, cytons are gray matter. Okay, so now what we learned from this, gray matter is your what? Cyton. And white matter is your axons. Which axons? Myelinated. Are we clear till this? Gray matter and white matter stuff. Are we clear with this gray matter and white matter stuff? Okay. Now in reality what happens? Does gray matter really look gray or white matter really look white? It's not like that. Basically what happens now, if you see the right hand side brain, I told you this is the original diagram. See, the white matter is whiter and the gray matter is darker. Okay, can you appreciate that, the change in tones, light and dark? All right. Now from here we can derive another conclusion, that is in brains we have white matter is inside, gray matter is outside. So in brain white matter is inside, gray matter is outside. But in spinal cord the opposite thing is observed, white matter is outside, gray matter is inside. So spinal cord looks like corpus callosum from outside. And now from this, as you have understood this, you can also tell that corpus callosum is made up of myelinated axons, isn't it? I hope that you can draw this conclusion. Now this much understanding of the structure of the brain is very good. We don't require much of it or further anything further. So now basically what we will do, we will go to the functions of the brain. Functions of the brain. Now see the cerebrum. Let's begin with the cerebrum. The cerebrum is so huge that we are supposed to divide it into small parts so that we can divide its function into different parts. Now in later classes, if you take up biology in your higher studies, you will see that these divisions are also further subdivided into very much minute and accurate divisions. We are not going into all that, but we are just going to the initial level of division. Now can you see these color differences? Now on the basis of the presence of the bones of the skull, now skull has different types of bones. On the basis of the presence of different types of bones over the brain has the cerebrum has different parts. Now the part of the brain below frontal bone is known as frontal lobe. The part below the parietal bone is known as parietal lobe. Part below temporal bone is known as temporal lobe, and part below the occipital bone is known as the occipital lobe. Now there are 4 lobes, types of lobes present. Now frontal will be 2, parietal will be 2, temporal will be 2, occipital will be 2. That means total 8 lobes in 2 hemispheres. Each hemisphere has 4 lobes, right? That means this part of the skull is covered by frontal bone. This part of the skull is covered by parietal bone. This part is covered by occipital bone, and in the front this part is covered by the temporal bone. Okay, yeah, we are coming to their functions. Now let's move on to their functions. Now see, frontal bone, frontal lobe. Let's start with the frontal lobe. Now what happens in the frontal lobe? Frontal lobe does the motor control. What is motor? That is functioning. Just remember. Now before motor control, just remember that they have role in problem solving, speech production. Now frontal lobe is basically the fast and frontal. So the reason of human beings fast development in this world is the frontal lobe. We had frontal lobe, that's why we evolved so fast. Why all sort of higher level feelings, like all humanly feelings, that feeling of love, feeling of like you when you are solving maths, when Einstein was doing the theory of relativity, or whenever Stephen Hawking was talking about space, time travel and all those stuff, all this higher level stuff which are only seen in humans, those things are done in frontal lobe, and frontal lobe is the reason that we evolved so fast. So F for frontal and F for fast. Now let's move on to the parietal lobe. So you have to write problem solving. In these areas you don't need to write. These areas just leave it. Speech production. We have speech. That's why we have society, and we have society that also helped in our evolution. So to understand that, we can solve problems, we can synthesize speech, and we can do the higher level functions. Okay. Now parietal lobe. Now parietal lobe does touch perceptions. Again, whatever is within the bracket you are not supposed to know. And body orientation. Body orientation is a very special type of sense that you are supposed to know. There are special sensors present in our joints of our body which sense the position of our body. Right? They sense whether my head is up or my head is down. And its relative position of the body. Whether my hand is up or my hand is down. Whether my legs are more towards the ground or my head is more towards the ground. Now this relative position of the body parts are sensed by the parietal lobe. Okay. So more of a general sensations like all sort of touch, pain, temperature, body orientation, these type of sensations are general sensations, are the business of parietal lobe, right? Okay. Now we will move on to the occipital lobe. Just take a screenshot of this slide. This is very important. These things are asked in exams. Now what we have occipital lobe. Occipital lobe is also known as the visual cortex. It deals with the sight. And now more about occipital lobe, we will be dealing in special senses, because sight is a special sense. We have sight as a special sense in details in our syllabus, so we will deal with it in that class, right? Just remember that occipital lobe is concerned with visual sensations and seeing. So reception of the stimulus and interpretation. Like suppose you are seeing a dog and you are interpreting it to be an elephant, and you are thinking that it's an elephant, then you have to understand that you have serious problems in your occipital lobe, right? Interpretation means you are seeing a dog, and that visual reception, that means you are receiving the visual stimuli of a dog, and interpretation means that your brain is interpreting it as a dog itself. Okay. Now coming to the idea of the temporal lobe. Temporal lobe is concerned with auditory processing, that is hearing. So temporal lobe, as you can understand, it's very near to the ear. Our ears are just located over here. If I am able to draw the proper diagram of the ear, or a very representative diagram of the ear is located just over there. So the lobe nearest to ear processes the auditory processing, right? And it comprehends the languages. Like, so speech is synthesized by the frontal lobe, but understanding of the speech, like what the person just said, that is done by language comprehension. And now if you are able to understand whatever I am trying to say, your temporal lobe is working fine. Okay. And temporal lobe has some role in memory and information retrieval. Information retrieval. Now what is the role of cerebellum? Cerebellum has a role in balance and coordination. If your cerebellum is damaged, you will not be able to ride a bicycle, you will not be able to swim, or you will not be able to walk through a narrow wall, or if you are a gymnast, if you are an acrobatics artist, you will not be able to perform acrobatics or those rope walking stuff. Now those circus men or women who do the rope walking, they have a highly developed cerebellum, because balance and coordination is a function of cerebellum, right? Have you understood till this? And what is the function of brainstem? Brainstem controls the involuntary responses of our body, right? Heart function, lung function, these you have to remember. That is, it controls heart activity, heart beating and respiration. And apart from that, many other involuntary activities that go on in our body, that is controlled by the brainstem as a whole. Now with this, we are closing off with today's class. In the next class, we will be focusing on the spinal cord, and a few things like cranial nerves are remaining. Now we will be talking about cranial nerves in the next class, and we will do the spinal cord, because there's nothing much to discuss about spinal cords. Okay. Now in one more class, we will be finishing off the nervous system, and then in one class, we will be dealing with the special senses, right? So should we end the class over here? Shall we? Let's end the class over here then.